Hello, we want to welcome you to another show of Bible Alive. And we're going to be talking about Queen Esther today, brave Queen Esther. But before we do, I want to introduce you to a couple of my friends, Tim Hart, a business associate, and a good friend of mine. Glad you're here again today, Tim.
Well, I'm interested in the story today.
Okay, I know you got a great question.
I've got lots of questions.
And Pastor Mark Howard, pastor of our church here in Coldwater. Glad you're here along with us. Okay. So, brave Queen Esther, that's what we heard the kids talk about, brave Queen Esther.
Well, anytime that you have a story or people talk about the passages from Esther, they always say, oh, good, brave Queen Esther. But, you know, like a lot of us, there is kind of a sordid past. I'd like to know more about her past.
Well, what makes you think she doesn't have a great past?
Well, because, as I read the Bible, there are a lot of different aspects of Esther's life that were really not on the straight and narrow. And as with us, you know, all of us sitting here, people out there watching, it's the same type of thing. You know, you don't feel like you're good enough out there to serve God. And here was Esther, who had kind of a sordid past, and yet she was asked to serve God. So my question is, let's hear about her past.
Pastor, I know that this is kind of a favorite story with you because, in fact, I didn't even understand all the things that took place before she actually really did the things that she did that we can consider as brave Esther. So what's going on with Queen Esther before all this stuff happened?
There are a couple things that we find in the experience of Esther where she, like so many Bible heroes, people want to assume that the Bible hero just, they were always on top of their game, but that's not always the case. And in the case, when the story of Esther, when we read about Esther, really the story kind of opens up with this situation with this wife of Ahasuerus, Queen Vashti, who the king says, hey, I want you to come in and basically parade yourself before my drunken friends. And she says, I'm not going to have any part of it. I'm not that kind of woman.
And you know, we look at sometimes Vashti as a bad queen.
Yeah,
and yet she has some pretty high standards right there. And where's this story found? I know.
Well, in the book of Esther.
And we want everyone to get in that book of Esther, in case you don't know. Queen Esther in the book of Esther.
It's right there in chapter 2 where it starts out where it says Vashti basically she said, I'm not going to go in, I'm not going to be part of this. And the king said, fine, then I'll get rid of you and I'll find somebody who will take part. And he searched out all the Bible says there in Esther chapter 2, and verse 3, king said, let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel into the women's quarters, under the custody of Hegai and the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. And of course you have Esther gathered among the people. Now something that I've read before is Esther's name means a star, but that's not really true. Okay. Esther actually comes from the word Ishtar, which was a goddess of fertility in these foreign lands. So Esther is in a situation, in fact, when her cousin Mordecai, who had adopted her, sent her in before the king with all of these beautiful young virgins, in verse 10 of that same chapter, it said, Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai charged her not to reveal it.
So, but why?
Well, you know, he just, it wasn't a popular thing to do. She was kind of running undercover, so to speak. I mean, she was a Jewess and didn't want anybody to know it. And so she wasn't wearing her faith in front.
So would have that completely hindered her chances, or not just hindered it, but it would have,
she would not have had a chance.
She would have not had a chance.
It seems to be the case. And then in verse 14 of the same chapter, chapter 2 of Esther, it says, in the evening she went, and in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who kept the what? If you look at your Bible, it says the concubine.
So what's a concubine?
You know, she goes in a virgin, she comes out a concubine after that night with the king. So Esther wasn't living the pure and holy life right there in the beginning.
See, that's surprising to probably a lot of people, because seriously, my whole life when I went to church, it was always Queen Esther. I mean, she was the bright and morning star right from the get-go, but she really wasn't. I mean, God had a plan for her, but she wanted to be queen. And I think, in my opinion, you know, and I could be wrong, but as I've read this, so often we want to make the rules for God. We want to bend the rules so we can help God out. And I think Mordecai truly did want to help the Jews out, and he thought, if we can get a lady in there that can be a part of helping us, here's what we got to do. And I don't think we need to help God out.
Oh, no.
Well, and don't you think that in this story, you find out that, again, another example of God taking somebody who has had a sordid past, who's not been perfect, and then he uses them in order to let others know his glory.
That's right. That's right. It's interesting because it comes to decision time. If you read on in the chapter, there's kind of another story taking place with Mordecai, who is Esther's cousin, who does remain faithful to God in many aspects of his life, and part of the Persian custom was to bow down to the rulers and the officials. And Haman was one of those rulers. Well, Mordecai refused to bow down to any human being. He would bow down to God only. Well, that created some tension, and Haman ended up getting a law made, a decree made, that permitted him to kill the Jewish people. And it was not until that time came where it comes to Esther's attention, as the Jewish people are fasting and praying and they're in sackcloth and ashes, that it comes to her attention that cousin Mordecai is out fasting in sackcloth and ashes. Her first reaction was to send her servants out and say, hey, tell him to change his clothes and brighten up a little bit.
So she was embarrassed for her cousin Mordecai. And what is sackcloth and ashes? What's that mean? I mean, you hear that in the Bible, but what were you doing in sackcloth and ashes? That was a sign of that was a typical sign of mourning we find throughout the Scriptures. When somebody was really realizing their own wretchedness and reaching out to the strength of God, it was really a way of saying that unless I have the help of God, I have nothing. And so the people had really turned their hearts to God at that time. And so it looked. But as far as Esther was concerned, you're going to make us Jews a laughingstock. Mordecai, get some clothes on. You know, you can live better than this.
Right. And so Mordecai sends the message back and he says, listen, the reason that I'm doing this is because there's a decree been made that the Jews are going to be executed. And Esther, you're the only one that's really in a position to do anything about it. And this is where the whole past of it, this is decision time for her, We all come to that point in our life where regardless of what our past is, God may call us to something. And of course, Esther's first reaction was, well, wait a minute, there's a law that if you go in before the king uninvited, it's your head. That's right. Unless he holds out his scepter to you. And she said, I can't do that. And Mordecai answers her. In fact, we can find it there in chapter 4. And his words to Esther are inspiring. He challenges Esther, and he says to her in verse 13 of chapter 4, Mordecai told them to answer Esther. He actually doesn't tell her himself, but sends his servants. Don't think in your heart that you're going to escape in the king's palace any more than the other Jews. In other words, they're going to find you out.
It doesn't matter if you're queen or not. I mean, if you're a Jew, by the decree, you're a dead woman. I don't care who you are.
In other words, it's time to stand up for your faith and make yourself known. Verse 14, he says, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. God will be faithful to deliver his people.
But that is a heavy burden, don't you think, to put on somebody, again, that may not even feel how righteous they are and how righteous they're going to be. That has to be just a huge burden.
Well, he finishes by saying, I mean, if you're talking about a heavy burden, he says, deliverance will come from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? In other words, Esther, it's riding on you.
And she's still a young lady.
Oh yeah.
And it is riding on her. But God would not put her in that position unless she could handle it.
And it's probably the biggest decision she's ever made in her life.
Yeah, and she'd made wrong decisions. It's so hard to make right decisions when you've made wrong ones. But we're gonna get back into that. We got to take a short break. I love this because it makes it practical. We're going to share the practical things when we come back. So don't go away. We'll be right back. I'm sure you want to hear the end of the story and how this is practical in our everyday lives. We'll be right back.